The house was eerily quiet at night, a kind of silence that seemed to stretch and deepen after Emily's death. 4 weeks, Claire had lived like a ghost herself, moving mechanically through the days, barely eating, barely sleeping. Each corner of the house held echoes of Emily, her laughter down the hall, the faint scent of her perfume in her room, as though she'd only just stepped out. Claire would spend hours sitting in that empty room, replaying memories in a silent vigil, hoping for some sense of her daughter. Then one evening, as she straightened the cluttered desk in Emily's room, Claire found something that made her freeze. It was a letter, folded carefully and placed just under a notebook. She knew she hadn't opened that notebook since Emily died. With trembling hands, she picked it up, recognizing the handwriting immediately. It was Emily's, written in her familiar, looping cursive, spelling out a single word on the front, Mom. Claire's heart pounded as she unfolded the letter. Inside, Emily's words were soft and apologetic, filled with regret and sorrow. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything. Please don't be sad. I didn't mean to hurt you. Each line hit Claire like a hammer, pulling her into a mixture of confusion and shock. She read the words again and again, disbelief clouding her thoughts. Had she somehow written this herself, in a state of grief she didn't remember? Or was it some twisted joke left by someone else? That night, she lay in bed, clutching the letter, sleep eluding her as her mind circled around the impossible. As dawn crept through the curtains, she convinced herself it had to be a mistake. But a voice in the back of her mind whispered doubts she couldn't silence. Over the next few days, Claire tried to put the letter out of her mind, but a gnawing feeling pulled her back to Emily's room each night, as though she were waiting for something. Then, just a few nights after finding the first letter, she found a second one. It was sitting in the exact same spot on Emily's desk, as though placed there for her to find. With shaking hands, Claire opened it, dread knotting in her stomach. This letter was different. The words seemed to carry a heavier weight, as if the emotions had darkened. Mom, I don't know where I am. It's so dark here. I keep calling for you, but it feels like no one can hear me. Please find a way to help me. The terror clawed its way into Claire's heart, refusing to be dismissed. She read and reread the letter, unable to shake the feeling that Emily was somehow reaching out to her, pleading for rescue. She wanted to tell someone, anyone, but how could she explain this without sounding unhinged? Even her closest friends had grown distant, their sympathetic gazes edged with discomfort whenever she spoke of Emily, yet the letters kept coming. Each one grew darker, filled with a sense of dread and despair that bled through the pages. Emily described a strange, shadowy place, a place that seemed to press in on her from all sides. Claire read these words with horror, her chest tightening as Emily's descriptions became more vivid. There's something here with me, something I can't see but can feel. It watches me, Mom. I think it's waiting for something. Claire's nights turned restless, her mind racing with questions. Was it possible that Emily was somehow trapped in some realm beyond death? Or had Claire's grief taken such a toll that she was imagining things? She began researching obsessively, poring over books and forums on the paranormal, hauntings, and theories about the afterlife. Her house filled with books on folk rituals, tales of spirits, and desperate accounts from other grieving mothers. She clung to every word, searching for some kind of answer, some way to make sense of what was happening to her. And the letters did not stop. One night, after yet another letter detailing Emily's suffering, Claire sat in the dim light of the living room, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea. She'd barely eaten or slept 4 days, and her body was beginning to show the strain. But her mind remained sharp, driven by a single, consuming thought: I have to help her. I have to find a way to bring her back. With newfound resolve, she decided to try one of the rituals she had read about, a ritual for communicating directly with the dead. The instructions were old and simple, supposedly originating from a small European village known for strange, mystical beliefs. Claire gathered the necessary items: candles, Emily's photograph, a few strands of her daughter's hair she'd kept in a locket, and began to prepare. That night, with the house drenched in shadows and the only light coming from the flickering candles, Claire sat cross-legged in Emily's room. She closed her eyes, focusing all her energy on her daughter, calling out to her in a low, shaky voice, "Emily, Emily, if you can hear me, please, give me a sign." At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, a chill crept into the room, wrapping around her like icy hands. Claire's breath came in short gasps, her heart pounding as she strained to hear any sound, any whisper. Then it happened. A faint voice echoed in the room. "Mom." The word was barely a whisper, as though coming from a great distance. Claire's heart leapt, her eyes flying open. She called out to her daughter, tears streaming down her face. The voice grew clearer, but filled with fear and desperation. "Mom, please, please help me. I'm so scared." Her words grew louder, filled with panic. Claire could hardly believe it, but there was no mistaking. It was Emily, but just as she began to ask what she could do, the voice changed. It deepened, taking on a darker, mocking tone. "Did you think you could save her?" it sneered. "You've done exactly as I wanted." Claire froze, horror washing over her as she realized the truth. She wasn't speaking to Emily, but to something far more sinister, something that had been using her grief to reach her. The voice laughed, filling the room with a sound that seemed to resonate through the walls, wrapping around her in a suffocating grip. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the presence vanished, leaving Claire alone in the silence, clutching the last letter in her shaking hands. The next few days passed in a daze. Claire felt like a shell, hollowed out and empty. The house felt different now, its quiet haunted by a new kind of darkness. She tried to convince herself it had been a nightmare, a trick of her mind, but deep down, she knew the truth. Something had been with her that night, something that fed on her sorrow and desperation. Then, one morning, she found one last letter. This one wasn't in Emily's handwriting, but in a rough, spidery script. It was short, just a single line that made her blood run cold. "I'll be seeing you soon." Claire dropped the letter, her heart pounding as she stared at it. She knew she could never escape this feeling, this sense of something watching her, waiting for her grief to grow, feeding off her despair. She realized with chilling certainty that this horror was far from over. The night ended with Claire sitting alone in her darkened home, haunted and broken. The air is thick with silence, and somewhere, faintly, she thinks she hears Emily's laughter echoing down the hall. But she doesn't go to investigate. She knows now that some things are better left in the shadows.